Hey, Thad was here a second ago. I'll wait for him to come back. He's grabbing his charger again. Thanks for everybody coming out here on a Sunday. I was going to joke when he gets back, but you don't work on Sundays. Here he is. We're here. We're live.
Stop sneaking up on me like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got COVID, everyone. Hang on. Let me get my water. Hold on. I am finally somebody. I've been waiting. It's been like, what, 3 years now? And finally, they gave it to me. So, yeah. I refuse to talk about it in public because everybody who sucks needs to talk about their COVID whenever they get it. And I guess why? I think it's about making themselves important. You're a part of history now.
Yeah.
And I really think
you're part of the struggle. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's why people love talking about it and love, in a sense, I think they love having it, unless it's going to kill them. But for them, the vast majority of people for whom it's not deadly, I think people do actually enjoy it being remarkable in that way. You're now important, you're significant, and you're part of this, very important news event. So It's very sexy. The disease itself is not so sexy, although for me, it's a cross. I guess I'm not supposed to talk about it. It's a cross between a cold and a flu. I was kind of debilitated for like 2 days, but I've had worse flu. I'll say that. I mean, it sucks. And like, there's zero reason for there to be a panic about it for those of us without comorbidities, et cetera. But it's just, this whole topic since the beginning, I've just so regretted that this has been the major topic of discussion for 3 years. It's just so unappealing. I mean, in so many ways, but I will say this. And I think this is really important. So I have been since the get-go on the team opposing lockdowns, opposing the mask mandates, skeptical of all of that. I've always been there since the very beginning. There was never a moment when I said, oh my God, maybe we should lock down and maybe masks do work. But now we've come to a moment where I think it's time for our side on this to oh, by the way, I just remembered we're on YouTube.
Yeah, but I mean, again, we're on Rumble too. Shout out to everybody on Rumble.
Right.
Yeah.
No, but what I'm going to say, oh yeah, it might not be okay with the YouTube people. Well, I'm going to say it anyway.
Okay.
I'll try to say it in a way that won't get us censored. Isn't this fucking ridiculous that podcasters have to think about this? Like,
well, again, Hotep was bragging the other night about speaking in code, about having his Twitter account for so long because he speaks in code. And
those guys, actually, the Hoteps, I think they might have like begun the code speaking about COVID. They're the ones I think way back started using euphemisms for it.
Yeah.
They understood the game.
They've understood the game. They've been doing it with everything for the last 5 years.
They've been telling you. Yeah. So here's the thing. We, of course, our side was totally correct about the severity of COVID, and therefore we were right about the silliness or lack of importance of lockdowns and masks. Okay. That's because this COVID, this strain, this virus was in fact never deadly for 99% of the population. Okay. So the thing is, we now know that COVID almost certainly came from bioweapons research. We know it almost certainly came from a lab in which they can tinker and strengthen and do all sorts of gain of function additions to viruses to make them super deadly. So there's no question that the US government, the Chinese government, whoever, can produce a virus that will be deadly for possibly, most of us or like a large percentage of the population. Well, then I think we need to have a conversation about lockdowns if that happens, and 95 masks too, and mask mandates and social distancing. I mean, does everyone on my team want to never be in favor of such measures, no matter what okay, cool. I need to hear this. No matter how powerful the virus is, I mean, this is where our side, I think, needs to be moving away from constantly harping on the lockdowns and the masks and moving more toward what you and I and people on the show have been talking about, which is getting at the origin of the thing so that we can not have a worse virus happen. And getting at the origin of it looks directly into foreign policy and the shenanigans of the security state, both here and in China. But that's what we need to think about, because there could be a virus that will necessitate some sort of, possibly, I hate to say it, government measures. So let me hear it. Why not?
Oh, just philosophically, health is a matter of personal responsibility. I'm not a fan of public health. If something is literally that dangerous, people will have no problem complying with whatever is in. I'm not going to argue theory about whether or not the government should get involved, but I'm all for people being reflexively pro-freedom whenever something happens. I think you and I probably got to our anti-COVID positions by June, and we were probably in March, April, May open to the possibility that this thing might be super, super serious and something that must be handled. But once the data came out and we could see for ourselves, we were a lot more brazen about what we believed about this thing. So yeah.
The correct anarchist position is that the people will take care of themselves.
Yes, and assume that the government and the officials are lying to you. That should be your instinct at first.
That if there is a deadly virus that kills half the or can kill half the population, that people will voluntarily not go shopping, not go to restaurants, not be in crowded public places indoors.
Well, they'll do what they did. They'll empty the shelves on the grocery stores and they'll freak out and they'll do whatever they can immediately. But at least you won't have the second problem of the economic damage and the personal damage of everything that happened with the lockdowns.
Okay. I want you to be right. I hope you're right. That's the position I want to take. I guess I'm not completely convinced that it's true. Although, then again, if you look at the way Americans did react to COVID, I mean, they generally went overboard, actually.
Yeah. I was on board for the first 2 weeks. They said 2 weeks to slow the spread. I'm like, fine. Yeah. 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
All right. Those 2 weeks are over.
Yep.
And there was no reevaluation. Everybody just kept doubling down. And there was a sunken cost fallacy involved where if you stop participating in the lockdown now, you're negating all the work that you put into lockdown, and it became people's religion at a certain point. It's really sad.
Of course, now I'm just thinking about YouTube.
Yeah.
I think we're toast because of what you just said.
Okay.
But that's okay. YouTube. Hi. I don't believe anything my friend here is saying. I used to be an anarchist, but I saw the errors of my ways, and I'm trying to counsel this young man to think more responsibly.
Well,
that's what this show is, YouTube. This is me having on lefty, fringe political people, and I try to talk them down to reality. That's that's what Unreported is about, YouTube. So please, that you understand this. Don't harm me.
And for our YouTube only watchers and people just stumbling on us just now because you watch a lot of YouTube, let me translate. Goo goo gaga, goo goo gaga.
You anarchists are incorrigible, I swear to God. Yeah. I hate this topic though. Let's talk about something else.
Yeah. Well, the tweet, you brought it up because it is relevant, because the take going around a lot is, there's this Chinese balloon and everybody's pissed off at it, and China's our enemy for sending the spy balloon over our land areas, over our military bases. Maybe they have an EMP in there, they're going to take out some cities. But the take was, if China is our enemy, why did we fund gain of function research abroad with them?
I saw Clint Russell say that on Twitter, and I was going to respond to him because it's actually very simple. The answer is very simple, but it's incredibly important. It's a great question. Why did the United States military and federal government and the NIH, why did they collaborate with the Chinese Communist Party, the government of China, in this gain of function research in developing anything, which they did. And it wasn't just the virus, by the way. It wasn't just at Wuhan. I mean, there's been many collaborations between the militaries, including war games in Canada with the Chinese present there. Well, the answer is simple, is that from the time that Kissinger and Nixon began the relationship between China and the United States and started developing business associations and relations in the 1970s, the great opening to China that was initiated by Kissinger. That's what they've been doing. They've been, until one moment, but the institutions, many of the institutions that are affiliated with the government, like many universities, have since the 1970s developed very close relationships with China, with the Chinese government. When I was a professor for 25 years, I saw more and more and more Chinese students in my classes, because the universities I taught for, which is typical of many universities, had exchange relationships with universities in China, and they sent their students over here to get trained. And that's been a big deal. There's Chinese institutes and universities all over the country. It's a very deep connection. And that's why the MAGA sort of ultra hawks like Steve Bannon, Peter, I'm forgetting his name, the other guy on the War Room, the other big Trump guy, Peter, the academic economist. Anyway, they've been right about that. And they've been sort of like sounding the alarm about all these relationships between American institutions and the Chinese government.
Oh, sorry, Peter Navarro.
Peter Navarro, thank you. Yeah, God, I watched that guy every day for a year, but I forgot his name. Anyway, yeah, so that crowd, even though they sounded hysterical at times, they were basically right. And it even caused me to be concerned. Mr. Anti-War over here, I didn't like it at all, because I'm definitely not a fan of the Chinese Communist Party or that government. But doesn't matter what I think. What matters is that the State Department and the Defense Department wanted clearly to maintain cordial relations with China, because they believed that would be most productive. That all changed in one moment, which was the week before the Ukraine war started. This is in February of last year. Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin had a meeting. They got together and they pledged, I think they called it a long-term relationship with each other. And then China essentially supported Russia in the war with Ukraine, and most importantly, began doing huge amounts of business in terms of buying Russian oil and gas for rubles too, to destabilize the petrodollar and destabilize American hegemony generally in Eurasia. So you can look at it. I mean, if you look at the Council on Foreign Relations, if you look at the major foreign policy think tanks, they were all basically pro-China, essentially. They were for continued, development with China, a non-hostile approach stance. That all switched and it turned on a dime in February after that meeting and after the war started. You could just see the entire American foreign policy establishment decided, oh no, China's the enemy too, because they're not siding with us on Russia. They're taking Russia's side. So Russia, for the people who run foreign policy, has been far more important as an adversary from the get-go than China, because of what Brzezinski says in the Grand Chessboard, which is that control of the Eurasian landmass is the most crucial thing for the United States in maintaining its global hegemony. Russia has been the only power in Eurasia to challenge that hegemony by establishing and maintaining its own sovereignty or hegemony in parts of Eastern Europe and Central and Eastern Europe. So Russia has always been known as the target, as the problem for the foreign policy establishment who want to maintain and extend the American empire. China, until earlier last year, was generally speaking more on the American side than the Russian side. They were not friendly with Russia, not terribly. They didn't have any sort of formal alliance, no formal trading agreements that were challenging to the United States. But once they went with Russia, that was it. it's game on. And that's what we've seen ever since. Biden changed his rhetoric about China immediately, started talking about them as an enemy. And then, most importantly, as we said 2 weeks ago, there is a massive buildup going on in the Pacific.
Oh, it's escalated this week. The Philippines, 4 more military bases added on the Philippines.
Well, we actually reported that 2 weeks ago. That's the same story that I was talking about 2 weeks ago.
Story?
Yeah, okay. about opening new bases in the Philippines. 4 new bases, which makes it now a total of 9 that the U.S. will operate from in the Philippines. And people should go look at a map and see how close the Philippines is to China, to mainland China.
It was in the news again. The Defense Secretary Lloyd J. Austin III was in Manila talking about them. Yeah.
All that changed was that Austin announced this.
Yeah, officially. Yeah.
But we knew it was in the works. Remember, there was that Marine Corps general.
Yeah.
Spilled the beans early on this, and we were one of the very few outlets to report on it. By the way.
Yeah. What publication was that in? It was behind a paywall. That was
the Financial Times.
Financial Times, yeah.
Which is a super august, respectable establishment newspaper, and always has been. Yeah. So he let it be known early. We were one of the first people to report on that, which I'm very proud of. And Austin is now just announcing it. So, but at the same time, same thing is going on in Japan, where the United States already has a huge military base in Okinawa. And by the way, I think a solid majority of Okinawans are opposed to that base being there. I think that's true. Anyway, it's a massive military base. Many people know about it. It's been there since World War II. And it is right across this little strip of water from China, from the Chinese mainland. It's a massive military buildup by the Japanese military. Japan, for the first time since World War II, is being encouraged and allowed to build up its own military. And they are pointing missiles, literally, they are building and pointing missiles in Japan, islands all around Japan that are pointed at China. And the United States is encouraging all this and assisting it in many ways. So this is a war mobilization by the United States against China in the Pacific that is going on right now. And that is because China chose to be friends with Russia instead of with us.
Well, what do you think about Lula trying to do peace talks with Brics between Russia and Ukraine, trying to get something happening here and using China as an intermediary? He sees China as neutral in this.
Yeah. I mean, as again, we reported on this several weeks ago during the Brazilian election. I mean, the Brazilian politics on this is really interesting in that, as much as the Bolsonaro people hate the Lula people and vice versa, they agree. Bolsonaro and Lula agree on Brics, on Russia, on the Ukraine war. Generally, they're not into supporting Ukraine. They are both, Lula and Bolsonaro, pro-Brics. And in fact, Lula was one of the founding members of it. And they haven't changed in that. Lula hasn't changed since he won the presidency again. He's still promoting Brics. He's still promoting a multipolar world. He's still supporting the idea of replacing the American empire with a new multipolar empire of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and then maybe Pakistan and maybe Saudi Arabia. Probably Saudi Arabia and maybe Pakistan. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this is what Lula's always done. He's always been pro-Brics, anti-American empire. And that'll be interesting to see how, the Democrats in this country, in our country, will react to that. Will they just ignore it? Because that is that's the cardinal sin, supporting Russia in the war against Ukraine is the worst thing you can do these days for liberals. But that's what their boy Lula is doing. The Biden administration has been very pro-Lula. Liberals in this country who know anything about international politics are very pro-Lula, but he is doing a really bad thing for them. And so I'm be curious to see how they, or if they say anything about that. But again, the American empire is receding daily.
Back to the balloon. The official story now is that it was a surveillance balloon, or I think the United States government is asserting that there is, after they shot it down, there was surveillance technology out there on the balloon that made it different than a meteorological type satellite thing. That's the official story. China is still asserting it was a weather balloon. This was infuriating for conservatives or for Bannon types to watch because
Mm-hmm.
we have the largest military in the world.
Right.
We could have easily immediately shot this down over the ocean, but it was obviously allowed to fly over for a while. And
Right.
that got some conspiracy theorists going, saying that perhaps they allowed this to fly over because the Democrats and the Biden administration want to trump up some anti-Chinese sentiment in the homeland in anticipation for a potential conflict in Taiwan.
Yeah. I mean, they're not totally wrong. They're not crazy about this. I just think they're a little bit hysterical about it. I mean, I'm all for shooting down the balloon. Fuck it. I don't have any interest in the China knowing our business, knowing what goes on in the United States. Certainly militarily, I think there's zero chance that China has any intention of doing anything against the United States militarily ever, unless they're forced to. They have always wanted to trade with us since the 1970s. They have always been gung-ho on trading with the United States. But apparently some of us don't want that to happen. So yeah, I mean, the thing is though, I mean, how dangerous was this balloon? I mean, China has thousands and thousands of people who work for it living inside the United States as we speak. And as I said, they are all in the major institutions, all the universities, media outlets, government. Many elected officials have direct financial ties to the Chinese government. Many of them, both Democrats and Republicans. There's spies all over the damn place. All over the damn place. And we know how much information they've gotten from here. So, I mean, the idea that some balloon at 50,000 feet with some cameras on it and some sensors would tell them crucial information. I mean, we know where the nuclear bombs are stored, you know, where the missiles are. I mean, it's much ado about nothing. Now, the thing is, if this other balloon in Latin America is also a surveillance balloon, I don't know what's going on, but I do know that China does not want a war with the United States.
Yeah, conservatives saw through this one pretty quickly too, because like Tom Cotton just tweeted out, I think that you know, there's this. Who cares about a surveillance balloon when everybody's using TikTok? Like,
right?
If you hate China, you got bigger fish to fry than this balloon here.
That's what Tom Cotton said.
I think so. Yeah, I need to look it up. But...
Mr. Bomb Everybody said that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I think he's still in favor of bombing China, but over
right.
TikTok, not a balloon.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous to think that China wants war with the United States. I think it's ridiculous also to believe that China wants to revolutionize American culture, you know, change the way that we live and think and behave. I see no evidence for that. You know, there's not a lot of cultural imperialism going on that I'm aware of. I've never heard from any institution in the United States that I should adopt Chinese behavior.
It looks like they're trying to sell capitalism back to us.
Oh, what do you mean?
They just want to trade.
Like, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. They don't give a shit. I mean, they're economic actors almost entirely. The whole Belt and Road Initiative, it's very clear that's what it is. Now, it's also true, though, that once they have roads and bridges and freeways and airports and ports all through Eurasia, Northern Africa, and Europe, and all of it being connected together with their infrastructural network, yes, they will be able to move tanks on that network, too. This is true on the Belt and Road Initiative. But I don't think that's why they're doing it. They're doing it so they can become rich and powerful, and so that they can never be dominated by the West again, which is like the mantra in Chinese politics. The 100 years of humiliation in which China was dominated and humiliated by Western powers is still the big problem that Chinese politicians have been trying to overcome. And the only way to do that is to strengthen themselves, and economically first, and then with their military, which is what they're doing. They don't want to go to war with us. They want to trade with us and become wealthy and powerful.
Mm-hmm. Since we're still on the topic, the Brics thing, Pakistan trying to get into some Brics meetings, but they're having tension with India. Yeah.
I mean, this is just India doesn't want them in, which makes perfect sense. In fact, I hadn't thought of that when the news first broke that Pakistan was making big moves to get into Brics. I didn't think about this, but India is one of the BRICS countries, of course, and we all know what the relationship between India and Pakistan is, which is they shoot cannons at each other, every couple of days in the mountains. And that's all. I mean, I think it's just that that rivalry between those two countries got in the way of expanding BRICS in this way. And it's a problem that every alliance will have. I mean, when NATO was being formed, a lot of the countries that joined NATO had their own beefs with each other, and they had to squash those beefs or not be in NATO. So I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if Pakistan will ever be able to be in BRICS because of India's presence there. But I think that's all it is. I don't think it's significant beyond that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And I think, well, what do you think? Do you think this, in my opinion, this solidifies BRICS as a more purely economic alliance?
No, it is. It always has been.
Yeah.
It always has been. But I mean, to say it's purely economic, again, is a little disingenuous because it's like saying the European Union is purely economic,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is. But then again, like the EU is weighing in on foreign policy matters all the time. I mean, they're essentially fighting the war in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
The EU also has I forget it. They have something similar to Article 5, in which if you remember the EU and you're attacked, all the members of EU are obligated to respond to that attack. So BRICS doesn't have that yet because they're not quite as formalized, but they could very easily, is my point. An economic alliance very quickly can move into a military alliance.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a military alliance. It's the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, the SCO, which is founded by Russia and China and other Central Asian countries, like the Stans. Several of the Stans are part of the SCO. So it's already happening. The military alliance has been growing in tandem with the BRICS economic alliance.
Mm-hmm. Cool. We'll get back to foreign policy, but Jordan Peterson was back on Rogan. Yeah. Your boy.
Yeah, no, this is the stuff where I think he's quite on point, actually. I've always liked what Peterson has said about this stuff.
Well, first, before we get into that, the first thing he started talking about was how much he hates anonymous accounts on Twitter. He proposed that, and I think there's some utility in this, that, all right, fine, the trolls can be in their own corner of Twitter, but the people who have verifiable identities are participating in a different conversation, and they should have their own Twitter, or they should have their own space to have serious big boy conversations away from the ankle biters.
I like it, actually. I mean, I'm not saying that I want some universal rule disallowing anonymous accounts on social media. I just think I'd rather be on a social media platform that doesn't allow anonymous accounts. And I want everyone, I just think it'd be make for a much better, healthier, actually more productive environment if everybody showed their names.
Mm-hmm. I think about that sometimes too, but I'm always afraid that it'll turn into Facebook, where when you have your own name out there, people take themselves way too seriously and get super sanctimonious over anything.
I guess I just don't get much value from the anonymous accounts, and I get a whole lot of grief from them and just a whole lot of stupidity and a lot of childishness. Our world of politics, and I've said this a few times, and people don't really recognize this for some reason, it's dominated by young men. Dominated. I mean, and that's sort of the culture of like dissident political Twitter. It's young dudes, who talk about, whether a woman is an 8 or a 10 a lot, and how some chick has too high of a body count to have sex with him. I mean, it's that vibe, very unsophisticated, very aggro, very sort of mean, very mean-spirited, the way that young men often are, teenage boys often are. I don't like it at all. And I mean, of course, sometimes they have something valuable to say, but I think they can say it with their real name.
I was going to talk about this at some point, but as the economy is getting worse, like we see this in depression, every time the economy gets bad, entertainment always stays strong because people want a sense of escapism. Yarvin has hinted at this before, that politics and participating in democracy is essentially, I mean, he uses other words, but he calls it essentially a form of escapism, in that
Oh yeah.
you're really not affecting anything, and you're just playing with your own head and having an escape from your own actual problems in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
I always wonder if we're drug dealers selling escapism to some people too on this.
Oh, of course it is. I mean, I often wonder, like, why do I spend a big chunk of every single day studying the Ukraine war, right? And other issues in the past too. I mean, that's what I do. And it's, this thing that will never directly affect me. It's so far away from me that most Americans don't even know is happening really, or they know almost nothing about it. And I will admit that I enjoy it, right? I enjoy it. It is, and I do feel when I'm watching the Duran or something, I do feel like I'm in another part of the world. I feel like I've been transported to this other place and time that is completely radically different from my own world. And it's similar to the way I feel when I write history. As a matter of fact, there is an escapist element to it, to going into the past or going to another place in the world in your mind like that. That I've always I love writing history for just that reason. I'm in this other time when I'm doing it, and there are all the cares and problems of my real world fall away, and it's nice.
Yeah. So
even if you're studying war, which is the problem for me,
Yeah.
it tends to be things like that I get into. But
well, like again, the mascot of the immature online male space, Andrew Tate, for me, he wouldn't exist if there wasn't better forms of escapism out there in entertainment for men. Like if pro wrestling was actually good, like it used to be in the 90s, nobody would be paying attention. Or if he was doing what he should be doing and fighting Jake Paul, then nobody would be paying attention or seeing him as a wise person,
He needs to fight. He needs to fight Jake Paul.
Yeah,
that's right. Does this right? What did I just hear about him? He's going to be held in jail for how long without a trial or without charges being? Am I right that he hasn't been charged?
No, he hasn't been charged. They're investigating still. Yeah.
How long has he been in now? A couple months?
A month, and I think they just tacked another month on top of it.
Someone cited some number. I forget what it was. It 30 days or 300 days? Was it 300 days that they can hold him?
I don't know. I know initially he was supposed to be in there for a month, but I think they added another month or two on recently.
You don't know the details of Romanian law?
No, I don't. Yeah, I just know his catchphrases.
You don't know due process in Romania? You don't know that?
No.
Okay.
I'm not a Romanian lawyer, although I hear those are very cheap.
I mean, the guy is getting screwed over hard, and I still have seen zero evidence to suggest that he was actually trafficking anyone, meaning coercing anyone into selling sex. I really don't believe that he did. I'd be shocked if that turns out to be true. But, and he wouldn't be the first person to be victimized for alleged sex trafficking when it was really just pimping.
Yeah. Well, I just bring him up because I want our audience to do what he did, in that I want them to take our videos and clip them, because that's how he got popular. Is he got popular by being incredibly entertaining and having an affiliate marketing program to where hundreds of thousands of accounts would just tweet clips of him all the time because of the free attention it got everybody. So that's how he hacked the matrix. And like, he may be a complete idiot on everything else, but he's a genius at online affiliate marketing.
I mean, you can't argue with his success.
Yeah.
I mean, my goodness, he built an unbelievably big audience from just saying outrageous stuff, basically, and then using that, right?
You see him more now that he's in jail than you saw him before he was in jail, at least on the apps. Like, you see, it's funny, like his followers are like tweeting out propaganda of like him kissing babies and being a nice person to like boost his image. It's really funny.
Really?
Yeah.
Anyway, he's getting the hammer dropped on him, and I think it's horrendous. I think it's completely unfair, unjust, and I don't like it, even though I have nothing good to say about Andrew Tate, really. I got no beef with him. I don't see why anybody in the world should actually want to do him harm. I guess that's what it is. I don't see any reason that we should want to do harm to Andrew Tate. And putting him in prison is doing him a lot of harm.
Yeah. Well, back to the first internet daddy, Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
I clipped this from it, and this is, it's a 4-hour podcast, and you got some of the best work of his out there. you know, in 2017 when he had his first run, you were frustrated with him because he didn't seem to have an understanding of postmodernism, and he kept using that word postmodernist in context that doesn't belong. But he is a phenomenal clinical psychologist. I think he knows Jung pretty well, Carl Jung, and he has certain insights that often are really, really on point. So we constantly talk about the infantilization of our culture, and this was his take on it.
Okay.
You know, toxic masculinity. There's no shortage of toxic masculinity. So is there any toxic femininity? Well, not if the feminine is just the, you know, oppressed virgin goddess whose nature, but how about we don't live in that fantasy world? And we know, yeah, there's female political pathology, the tendency to infantilize everyone, and the tendency to assume that everyone who doesn't go along with the infantilization is properly characterized as a predator. And so, you know, you wonder, why are the universities turning into extended daycares? Well, a lot of the reason for that is that women who don't have anything better to do are turning the university students into the infants they never had. So, yeah.
Jesus.
So, I don't know when we'll be able to be mature enough to have that conversation. You know, 20 years from now.
So, what's going on with the Riddler suit?
Oh yeah, he had like a bunch of suits tailored for him for his tour. I think he was taking the Exodus thing on tour a little bit in Europe. That's the Heaven and Hell suit, the magenta and the blue.
Is that what he calls it?
Yeah. If you look on the inside, there's like fire and clouds.
Ooh, that's corny.
Yeah,
that's really corny. Yeah, although I am, like many things having to do with Jordan Peterson, I am ambivalent on the suit and the suits. He's become his own kind of dandy and dresses way up all the time, all this custom-made suits I've heard about. Yeah, I'm all for that because, you know, I've railed against men dressing like boys for a while now, and I do hate it. It's part of the reason that I started wearing a nice, you know, button-down shirt. So I'm all for that. I just think it's poor taste having a two-tone jacket like that. But anyway, that's really not what I'm here to talk about. He's right. He's right about the feminization and then infantilization of American culture. It is going on. And if you've spent he and I know this very well because we've spent most of our lives in universities, and you really see it in universities, where feminism is the unquestioned God, that we all must abide by the rules, the norms of feminism in universities. It is utterly suffocating. No expression of masculinity is allowed. Any expression of masculinity will be punished. And this thing is, you know, when my students and his students, who we were teaching in the 90s and 2000s about these things, they're now of age, they're now adults, now they're running institutions. And so we're now seeing it in politics, we're seeing it in the media. But yes, you know, feminism gave women political power, institutional power, and women generally have different ways of going about things than men do, not for biological reasons necessarily, but, you know, most do. I mean, I'm not going to have the debate now about whether it's biological or not, but it's just a fact that most women have different ways of going about things than most men do. And they tend, not surprisingly, to have maternal approaches to problems, right? Which means coddling people who claim to be victims. When your kid scrapes his knee, he's screaming and crying. It's the worst thing that's ever happened to any human being. And you don't tell him, hey, stupid, that's just a knee scrape. You know, you tell him, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. That's so bad. I'm so sorry. Well, that's what we do politically now. That's what we do, you know, with society writ large. And then he also is right that those who do not play by that game, who refuse to be infantilized, get othered, and they are denounced as predators and offenders and oppressors, and they are singled out. They are identified as targets to be dealt with by the state, because women by themselves can't can't address these problems directly. They need the state to do it for them. So it's all very dangerous and very ultimately totalitarian. But yes, people are treated like children who are on their team. If you're not on their team, you are the enemy. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on this? That's seems to me almost an obvious fact at this point.
Oh yeah, universities are totally extended daycares for, I guess, privileged kids or anybody lucky enough to get into one. But yeah, the only people I see make it out of universities better than before are ones who kept their head down, had a very clear idea of the career that they wanted out of college, and just tried to get an A and not pay attention to anything. Just what do I need to do to pass? And this is what I'm going to do when I get out. Those are the only people who I see better when they leave than when they came in. Honestly, yeah.
I mean, so university, well, I should say liberal arts, that's only, universities teach a lot of things, but the liberal arts curriculum that is still central in American colleges and universities, it's like essential and important and a wonderful thing to teach people, but it's only the handful who want to go on to become professors or public intellectuals. There are a very small number of people who are interested in that stuff and will be interested in that throughout their lives. I'm one of those people. So I should have gone to college for sure, because I really wanted to read Plato, and I still want to read Plato, and now I teach Plato because I originally read him in college. But that's just probably less than 1% of the population should be doing a liberal arts education. Vocational training, I'm all for it. Sciences, great, because that's all productive and people get a lot from it and they're interested in it and it's important to them. But reading Shakespeare and philosophy and James Baldwin and, reading anthropological texts from the late 19th century, and I don't see a reason for most people to do that. So it's those of us who should be in colleges. I mean, I think we do okay. I know that even though I was surrounded by communists and weirdos in college, I still got a whole lot out of it. And I'm still very glad I did that reading then. Yeah, I think everyone else should avoid it. And I think it'll be damaging to you. I don't see how it couldn't be damaging in a way if you're not interested in that stuff, sitting in those classrooms, which are boring, even if you're into them, even if you're into this stuff. College classes are almost always tedious and boring. So yeah, it's a house on fire. I was just watching, what was it? I was watching some academics, some very elite academics at one of the Ivy Leagues, and I was just once again stunned at how just completely stupid they are. It's just they keep reciting the catechism. It's just this religious thinking about white supremacy, misogyny. Sometimes they'll talk about, homophobia maybe, but it's just one thing. It's this white supremacy mantra, and they have nothing new to say. And it's so pathetic. I mean, it is actually underestimated how bad the liberal arts are in universities now. I mean, I have not seen really any work out of a university in the last 10 to 20 years in the liberal arts that I find to be interesting or important. And most of it is garbage. It's just recycling the same tired ideas over and over again. Living in history, there's no reference to any changes in race relations since 1965. It's just constant references to slavery and Jim Crow and redlining, slavery, Jim Crow and redlining over and over again. And it'll never change. Apparently, Black people will always be victims. They will always need to be saved by white people, and they will never be saved by white people because white people are racist. And therefore, this is an eternal struggle that will go on forever. And aren't we happy about that?
Okay, well, since you bring that part up, I was going to say before that, just how universities have to comment on if George Floyd happens in Minnesota, every university administrative staff has to issue out a statement saying that they hope all their students of color feel safe at this disturbing time.
Right.
That sort of just infantilizing. I hope everybody's safe. Or if somebody writes "it's okay to be white" on chalk, everybody has to be like, "Oh, is everybody safe? There's something dangerous going on here." And
Yeah.
this is what drew me to you first, was your first appearance on Rogan, when you were talking about like lab equipment being covered up and people thought that was Klan hoods, the moral panics of 8 years ago. And it's just crazy. Like,
yeah. Well, the infantilization of Black people has been going on for a very long time. They were the first people to be treated like that. I mean, since World War II and since the advent of racial liberalism, liberals have been talking about Black people and to Black people as if they're children. And I've seen it at the highest levels of academia. I've seen it now in government, and I've seen it in popular culture. Oh, that's what it was. I saw some guy. He's a professor of sociology at Berkeley. Okay. So he's like a big deal in academia, right? And he was talking about this philosophy professor at Georgetown, and he described him as the most important public intellectual in the world, and just going on and on about. And then I saw other people describe him the same way. Just rapturous praise for this guy. He's like an early 30s guy. He's Nigerian American, and I watched him do a podcast, and like, it was just, he was almost incoherent. He had nothing new to say whatsoever. He was just talking about reparations and climate change, and how reparations and climate change are somehow connected. And his whole argument is the racial justice you want cannot happen in a burning world. So we need to have the racial justice we want, we have to have climate justice too. And this is a professor of philosophy at Georgetown, and that's what he's talking about. I mean, it was amazingly bad. And I just thought, this is what they do. Because he's Black, he gets praised like he's God on earth, and he's mediocre, that's infantilization, because that's what you say to your 5-year-old when he shows you his ugly thing that he made in craft class today, right? Look, Mommy, I made this vase. It's all fucked up and broken and ugly. And like, you're like, oh my God, that's so beautiful.
Let's put it on the fridge.
Yeah, you're right. You're so talented. You're so smart. And yeah, that's how we talk about Black people. Spike Lee's whole career was dependent on that.
Oh, well, real quick before we get there, I feel sorry for, Black people in the institutions of universities who are qualified, and they have this aching suspicion that the university itself is racist, and they feel that their colleagues think less of them. Glenn Loury talks about this all the time, and they're right, but it's not conventional white supremacy, although it kind of is. But it's this feeling that the standards are lower for them, and they are, which is a shame, and that they'll never receive the actual credit that they're due for the good work they do.
It's totally white supremacy, right? Because the assumption undergirding all that behavior is that white people are superior and Black people are inferior, and Black people need to be saved by us, just like kids. That they are so vulnerable, so helpless, that they must be helped and saved and coddled and pushed along and always encouraged, no matter what they say, and never contradicted or anything like that, never argued against. No, it's white supremacy. It's treating Black people, thinking of Black people as children. I don't see how that's not white supremacy. But yeah, it's amazing. Oh, Barbara Fields, who was on my show, who was on Unregistered a year ago, 2 years ago. She is this fantastic Marxist Black professor. I mean, I hate to say that, but it's true. Who has for decades been complaining about this, about being treated differently, because Barbara's work originally was on slavery, but the slave economy in Virginia and Maryland, I think it was. Some of it, very little of it, was about race or racism. It was about the economy, about the economics of plantations. But she gets made into a race scholar. And so she's basically forced to write about race and think about race. She's always resented it. And even though she's on the left, she hates this thing. But yeah, Glenn Loury and John McWhorter have talked about this a lot, and the best. Those guys are totally on it. I remember Glenn getting really angry talking about this in one of his podcasts, and he started shouting, "I want to be treated like a man." And it was really moving, because it's like Glenn Loury, who's like a powerhouse of a human being, who was then, in his 60s and like extremely, decorated economist, intellectual, super well respected, but he himself feels like he hasn't been treated like a man in places like Brown University and MIT and Harvard. Oh my God. It's so disgusting to watch that happen. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a prestigious professor at an Ivy League school talk to a black colleague as if they were a kid.
Yeah, and I think Batya Ungar-Sargon was talking about that in Chicago, and that basically, like all liberals know this as a fact, and they just accept it. Like,
what's that killer stat that Batya always pulls out? There was a study done. I know what it was. A study was done that showed that people who identify as liberal dumb down their speech when they're talking to black people
to a measurable extent. Yeah.
Yes, to a measurable. They dumb down their speech when talking to black people. There it is. That's it. That's it. That is basically proof that liberals are white supremacists.
I mean, yeah. Let me show you the AOC clip, right? When she was talking about women of color being taken off these committees because Ilhan Omar got taken off of the Foreign Policy Committee, and she became a Southern Baptist preacher all of a sudden. She got overtook by the Spirit.
Go, girl.
Yeah.
Don't tell me that this is about a condemnation of anti-Semitic remarks when you have a member of the Republican caucus who has talked about Jewish space lasers and an entire amount of tropes and also elevated her to some of the highest committee assignments in this body. This is about targeting women of color in the United States of America. Don't tell me, because I didn't get a single apology when my life was threatened. Thank you.
Don't tell me. I bet she's tired.
Yeah. She from doing all the work.
She's tired, and she's not going to do the work for you. Okay, you have to do the work yourself. Yeah. It's targeting women of color. Really? I mean, that's just so silly and obviously stupid. I mean,
women of color like Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell.
I mean, Republicans are just like Democrats. They love women of color when they agree with them. Love them. What's that badass lieutenant general? Not lieutenant general. What's her attorney general? I think she's attorney general in, was it Virginia? That black woman. She's a total badass.
Is it the lieutenant governor?
Lieutenant governor. That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. Lieutenant governor.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's an example. Republican, like pretty MAGA-ish too, and they love her. Can't get enough of her. Of course, they love black people when they agree with them, just like Democrats. But anyway, yeah, I mean, AOC, it's theater kids. People have said that the squad and kind of like the new woke brigade in Congress is all theater kids. And there's your example. There's your evidence of that.
And there's another study, I think, of politicians where Republicans don't code switch when they go to black towns and they caucus for black people. I wish I had the clip, but, Joe Biden talking about growing up in the black church and he can't move in time or clap on the beat. And he's, I went to a black church every Sunday after going to Shabbat. And then, every Democrat politician went to 5 churches every week on Sunday,
Yeah. It also reminds me of how every socialist is a huge basketball fan and they love talking about basketball all the time. And it's all they ever talk about is black players. This is their opportunity to talk about black people with some sort of intimate knowledge, and I know that that's a big part of the calculus when they're watching basketball is, ooh, this looks good. This looks
except
good
for Kyrie Irving.
This looks good on me, except for the ones who don't agree with them.
Right? We're still talking about critical race theory, or just the idea that black people are perpetually oppressed and everything is always the white man's fault. We saw this with the Tyree Nichols police killing, where you had 5 black officers and 1 white officer off camera cheering him on, but 5 black officers, unfortunately beating a black man to death. And the takes came out on all the, cable news networks that this is white supremacy, that this is the white man's fault.
First of all, the Tyree Nichols thing, I've watched the video. I assume there's only one video, right? I've watched it like 3 times. You never see them really beating him up.
Yeah, no, I haven't watched the video. I've seen screenshots from different angles. I guess I've heard clips, but yeah, I haven't.
I mean, I'm
at it
not
all, but yeah.
challenging anything. I've just never seen them
Yeah.
doing any serious harm to the guy.
I think there's
But
also
obviously
a
they
body
did.
cam footage that's a little bit more explicit, I think.
I mean, obviously
Yeah.
they did because he's
Yeah.
dead, but and he wasn't because of a heart attack. So young guy, he was very in shape, the skateboarder. Yeah. So oh boy. So the dumb shit left was saying this is obviously just white supremacy. And then the dumb shit right was like, how could it possibly be white supremacy? It's a bunch of black people doing it. And I tweeted something, which was that if you read the slave narratives, the interviews with ex-slaves that were done in the 1930s, you'll see most of them using the N-word, not positively, and saying things like the N-words are the inferior race, and they're not as good and powerful and strong and smart and diligent as white people. I mean, just straight up. I mean, they were anti-black racist, and this is, we've known this has happened. There have been lots of Jews who are, anti-Semitic. I've known several Jews who are anti-Semitic. So white supremacy can be internalized by the subaltern group for sure. And I'm not saying that's what happened here. I have no idea what those black cops were thinking. I sort of doubt it is internalized white supremacy, as a matter of fact, because, I just thought the right wing should be informed of this, that it's not a priori stupid to say that this is white supremacy. It is possible that those cops were acting on white supremacist assumptions.
Well, not even that.
I don't think they were.
Okay.
But it's
just
possible.
like, once you sign up to become a cop, you are basically a cog in the wheel of a white supremacist system that disproportionately affects black people.
That too. Well, but that means you've internalized it too, because then you think that what you're doing is just, and beating up black skateboarders is just because the machine is telling you it's just. So lost my train of thought there. It's the COVID talking. I was going to go somewhere with that.
Oh, Republicans shouldn't be surprised when they hear the fake.
No. Okay, so here's the thing. No, the reason I don't think that it was white supremacy, informing these black cops to kill Tyree Nichols, is that, and I've said this to people over the years, I've made a name in part by heavily criticizing the criminal justice system and mass incarceration and police brutality. I've been doing that for many, many years. But I've always said, if I were a cop, I'd probably be doing some police brutality out there. And if you took the most woke pro-BLM person and put them in a cop's uniform and made them a cop, and most importantly, made them patrol in an area like Compton or South Chicago or the Bronx, they would have a totally different idea about policing. I mean, they would be wanting to do some harm to people, and they'd be scared all the time. Most importantly, they'd be scared all the time. To deny that is just like, what are we going to do? I mean, to deny that being a cop in Compton, like on the streets in a place like that, is not terrifying is ridiculous. And when you're terrified, you're going to do things like shoot before you speak to them, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to happen at some point. So the ultimate answer to all this stuff is improving those neighborhoods, improving those areas in various ways. I mean, then we really won't need cops. We really won't need policing. And we won't need mass incarceration. But that's not the case now. I mean, there are many parts of the United States that are fucking dangerous, and especially dangerous for cops. Mm-hmm. So, overreactions. It's amazing there haven't been more overreactions to things like, do I think we should constrain cops as much as possible? Oh yeah. Do I think we should have body cams on them? Of course, and I think we should eliminate many laws. I think we should eliminate all the drug laws, and I think we should reduce penalties in many ways to reduce the number of interactions between police and citizens. But again, if you're a cop, I'd like to see you behave differently. If you're especially if you're working in one of those neighborhoods. So that's why I don't think they were white supremacist in any way. I think they were just by the way, it was in Memphis, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God. I mean, Memphis is like the most dangerous town on the planet. I mean, the crime in Memphis is off the hook. So being a cop in Memphis, I can't even imagine the stress and the terror. I mean, every time you go outside with your uniform on, my goodness, everybody, if you doubt me, go check out the crime statistics on Memphis. But I can't imagine being a perfectly good, orderly police officer if I worked in Memphis.
Mm-hmm. It's not. Yeah. So yeah, the narrative is that these people were all self-hating and that they were acting on their internalized self-hatred and that it was the white man's fault. And so Piers Morgan brought Zuby on with another activist, but this is Zuby talking about that idea.
I agree that the video was disgusting. I agree that this is an issue of training, and I agree that this is an issue of the human heart. I think that any attempt to put the blame on this in any way, shape, or form on racism or white supremacy or white people in general is absolutely ridiculous. I also think it's pretty degrading because this sort of idea stems from the notion that Black people, Black men, Black women, that we do not have full agency and responsibility and therefore accountability for our actions and our words. We end up in these ridiculous situations where no matter the permutation, no matter what happens, even if there's not a single white person involved in the situation, in the Memphis police force, even the police chief is a Black woman, the large percentage of the force is Black, and people are still trying to lean on this white supremacy is the answer and the reason for everything. And honestly, it's lame. And as someone who's lived my entire life as a Black male, certainly I've never been possessed by this sort of phantom of white supremacy that's made me want to attack anybody, let alone another Black person. And I think that we need to put the blame and responsibility squarely on the individuals who were involved in this.
I completely agree.
I think it's tragic that this young man died.
That's a great point. That's a great point. It denies agency to Black people, which is, that's been the liberal game for about 80 years now, since the advent of racial liberalism. It's been to do that. Black people can only be saved by us, by white people. And they don't know what they do. They're not responsible for it because of white supremacy, because of slavery, because of segregation. It's been, they've been forced to act like criminals. The fact is that more than 50% of murders in this country are committed by Black men. So if you're a cop and you're patrolling the streets and you see Black people over here and some white people over there, it's just statistically valid to assume that it's more likely that the Black people will be committing crime because that's just the way it is. I mean, and so how are you supposed to behave? Like, you're supposed to treat everyone equally? And that would be stupid, and it could be life-threatening as a cop. I'm calling for racial profiling here, Michael.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, everybody knows that the stereotypes are completely made up off of the opposite of the truth and have no founding in reality at all.
Also, by the way, the murder rate, it's now like since COVID, since the lockdowns, it's now, I think it's 80% of homicides since 2020. 80% of homicides in the United States since 2020 have been committed by Black men. Mm-hmm. That's really, I mean, and by the way, Black men, so we're talking about 6% of the population is accounting for 50 to 80% of murders. Mm-hmm. And you're telling me you're going to roll through Compton exactly the way you're going to roll through Beverly Hills? You're going to treat the subjects of Compton or South Chicago exactly the way you would treat people as a cop in Beverly Hills? That's crazy.
Mm-hmm. So when the rioting started, people were asking, hey, wait a minute, all these cops have been arrested and they're being prosecuted. Why are you rioting? It looks like we have justice in this situation. Mm-hmm. Do you find these riots kind of empty? Like 2020, there's no like substantive policy goal. There's no light at the end of the tunnel here, like the riots in the 60s or the 90s.
Well, I mean, that's because white supremacy is eternal. So there's no point in calling for any, solutions, because there never will be a solution because white people are inherently racist. Mm-hmm. That'll never go away. That is Ta-Nehisi Coates' whole argument, which became the dogma of the left since he started doing that in 2014, 2015, I think, when his book came out. Yeah, I mean, that's what people assume. I mean, that's what CRT trains you to think. You know, that's what liberals believe now. They officially believe that white people are inherently racist, and therefore racism in the United States will never go away. Coates has said that explicitly. So, you know, why would you be, you know, holding signs during your BLM protests, you know, calling for specific reforms? It's a nihilistic, profoundly pessimistic politics. It's actually called Afro-pessimism. There's a name for it.
So it's Black History Month, and like I've been super disappointed by, I guess, the online space, or just what I've been seeing people celebrate Black History Month with. Like it's like a shadow of its old self, where like people are only talking about, hey, here are some animated characters that happen to be voiced by Black voice artists, and they're great, but like that's, you know, no Crispus Attucks, no Harriet Tubman, no Malcolm X. Like it seems like Black history is being completely erased. Splash Mountain, for example, just got rebranded, right? The conservatives are railing about this just like they are about the green M&M being unsexy. But Splash Mountain's being rebranded for The Princess and the Frog as opposed to Song of the South, talking about plantation life and great piece of American folklore.
Right. Wait, what's wrong with Splash Mountain?
Oh, it's based off of Song of the South.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, the movie about Joel Chandler Harris's story.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, there's an obsession with surface shit like that. You know, how many Black people got nominated for an Oscar? That's so important. But yeah, reforming the criminal justice system, whatever. Yeah, this is rich people's politics. And I mean, even Black Americans are rich people within the global context. Yeah, this is the politics that rich people worry about, right? Because they're not worried about being hungry. They're not worried about their village getting bombed. They can sit in their houses ordering DoorDash, complaining about, you know, how many Black movie stars there are,
while erasing the first generation of Black movie stars like James Baskett.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, they've thrown them under the bus. I mean, and there's not just him. There's Stepin Fetchit. There's a bunch of but it's bankrupt and pathetic and ultimately juvenile. And it's actually ultimately, to use a Marxist phrase, it's also bourgeois. As I said, this is what wealthy people think about and worry about. It's what they can worry about.
You're about to get into talking about Spike Lee. You know his movie Bamboozled, about about blackface performers obviously always being miserable and always being derogatory and derisive. I feel like he's projecting how he feels advancing the liberal narrative at every step of the way. But
meaning,
that he's like, his movies like Black Klansman is anti-Trump. Like a lot of Black entertainers nowadays are just, to force themselves into the market, like they're just out there getting their affirmative action roles, and I think they feel kind of fake for it.
Bamboozled, yeah, I know it well. It's it's ostensibly an attack on blackface minstrelsy, because we all know how terrible blackface minstrelsy is and how it's just obviously clearly racist. But if you know my work at all, if you know Renegade History of the United States, and I've also written some articles about this for Reason, you will know that actually for the first several decades of blackface performances in the United States, which began in the 1830s, but through much of the 19th century and even later, blackface minstrelsy was almost always white guys expressing an envy and admiration for Black culture and Black people, and singing and dancing like they imagined Blacks sang and danced. And you can see it in the lyrics of their songs. I mean, they talk about wishing to be like a slave, wishing to be, not meaning they wanted to be enslaved, but they wanted to be like the Black people who were enslaved, because they saw in their culture lots and lots of freedom and lots of pleasure that they couldn't access in Victorian America. as white people. They weren't allowed to do things like sing and dance the way that slaves were. So, and this has continued to the present day. So that there's people like you and me, Mr. Afro-Cuban percussionist there, and me, lifelong, huge admirer of all forms of Black music, Black slang, you name it. Yeah. So it's something to be looked into. But yeah, do not assume that blackface isn't racist. But Spike, as I said, like he's been benefiting from like cultural affirmative action.
Yes.
Since the beginning, right? Where we just give Black people like 2 pushes up the ladder, when we're evaluating them. Like, what's her face? Lupita Nyong'o.
Oh, Lupita Nyong'o. Yeah.
Like, remember when she first came out and it was just, the word wasn't, she's beautiful or she's even so beautiful. It was just everybody was saying, she's the most beautiful woman who's ever lived. Oh my God, she's an absolute goddess. I've never seen such beauty in my whole life. She puts every other model and actress to shame. She is the most beautiful woman who's ever, it's just this thing, right? Because she's Black.
Mm-hmm.
You see it all the time.
Yeah. Or, dude, I listened to, Perfume Nationalist Jack Mason put out his episode on Song of the South again. He had this observation that the FHM, the frizzy-haired mulatta that you see on the CIA websites, is a white liberal fantasy that a lot of Black people in American culture, Black women in American culture, have weaves and have straight hair and are perfectly fine with it. And the frizzy-haired thing is just a liberal fantasy that you only see in commercials, really.
Of course. Yeah, it's trying to make Black people and what they need them to be, which is authentic victims, right? Who also are resistant, who are rebellious against their oppression. And straightening hair is seen as like white supremacy, obviously. And so if you're resisting that, then you're that's what Black people naturally do. They naturally resist against any form of white supremacy, including putting straightener in your hair.
Yeah. Working for the CIA is resistance. Straightening your hair is not resistance.
Oh, by the way, I just heard of yet another young person who I know, not well, but she's in my world here, who's a college student who's like a liberal from Marin County. Okay. She just got recruited by the FBI. Mm-hmm. Yet another one. And she's all about being woke and being socially responsible, and social justice is all she's all about. Yeah. She's going to work for the FBI. And it's like, yeah, that's what you should do. If you're an SJW, you should work for the FBI or the CIA because they're your leaders now. They're your leaders. That's where the left is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, shoot. Well, this transition worked out a lot better in my head, but we got to talk about the drone strike in Iran, and Jordan Peterson got into some trouble or some heat online for it because he was talking on his podcast that maybe the United States should invade Iran, or somehow the international community should make it very well known that we're not going to tolerate this misogynist regime in Iran.
He called for regime change.
Yeah, regime change. Yeah.
Right. Good, Jordan. Mm-hmm. Are we going to watch him or?
Well, yeah, we can. I can play the clip, but yeah, the wokesters that you were just talking about are all for regime change in Iran. That's a big woke talking point nowadays.
A lot are. I don't know about all, but a lot are. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If any of you have been particularly taken.
Go ahead. No, go.
If any of you have been particularly taken by.
Sorry.
Any of you have been particularly taken by this story today, you could always put pen to paper and write your congressman or your senator and let them know that you're not all that happy about the situation in Iran, and that if the politicians got their act together and were stalwart in their opposition to this fundamentalist, totalitarian, misogynistic, brutal regime, that maybe it could be pushed over, and that would be a nice object lesson to totalitarian tyrants everywhere in the world.
Pushed over. Yeah, that does sound like the Marine Corps, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it turns out Jordan Peterson is not so smart about foreign policy matters. Mm-hmm. And the nice thing is I've seen a lot of people on the sort of populist right take him to task for this. Robert Barnes and others like that have gone after Peterson for this, thank God. So amazing that the right wing is now the anti-war faction in this country. But mm-hmm. Yeah, he doesn't know. I mean, he's new to this. He hasn't studied it, I don't think. He certainly hasn't sort of studied, I think, the history of the anti-war movement and the anti-war critique and critiques of the U.S. empire and all that. So he's naive.
But Thad, women are suffering in Iran, and the only thing you could do is raise awareness.
Well, so the thing about Iran, it's depressing for me, or it's difficult for me, because I've been saying for a long time, and I've written about this. I mean, publicly, I've written at least 2 articles about Iran, about how popular culture, American and Western popular culture, is changing that country from within, regardless of what the United States government does to Iran, that the people within Iran are moving more and more and more toward Western modern ways of thinking and away from Sharia law and Islamic rule. And women taking off their hijabs in public is just one manifestation of that. But if you've been in Tehran in the last 20 years, you'll know that it looks more and more like Los Angeles. And people are not really into praying and obeying the mullahs. So that's true, what I'm saying there. So my point there is that we don't need U.S. intervention. We don't need our government or the CIA to do anything in Iran. The people there are taking care of it themselves. Mm-hmm. But I am also pretty much convinced that the CIA has had something to do with many of these protests in Iran over the last year. I'm sure that they hired some people to protest in the streets. I'm sure they've encouraged people to protest in the streets. There's no doubt about it. And so it's very tricky, I guess what to say about this.
Well,
but go ahead.
Not even that, but I mean, let's move on to the drone attack. Do you think it was Israel?
I mean, well, the U.S. almost certainly called the shot. Uh-huh. And, I mean, Israel wants to bomb Iran all the time. So they might have done the deed, but I'm sure they got assistance and encouragement and are allowed to do it by the U.S. I mean, Israel won't do anything like that without the U.S. Mm-hmm. authorizing it. Yeah, it could have been an Israeli jet that did it, but I'm sure the CIA helped them out. In part because Tony Blinken, the state Secretary of State,
yeah,
he issued this statement in which he didn't deny it at all. He just said, "I don't know anything about it. That's it." So okay, so you did do it, just like Nord Stream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this thing that we all thought would be great would happen. I don't know anything about this thing now happening. Yeah,
right. Yeah, yeah. So what's going on is that Iran has been supplying Russia with drones, which Russia has been using in the war against Ukraine. And now I think it was announced today that despite the bombing in Iran to try to stop that, Iran and Russia announced today that they're opening a factory inside Russia that will be co-operated by Iran and Russia to develop drones, a whole drone factory inside Russia. So it's not helping. They didn't even stop this from happening. But yeah, Iran's been getting bombed like this for years and years and years, usually by Israel, but almost always with U.S. help for various reasons, to stop their nuclear program. I mean, they killed scientists. They killed they assassinated nuclear scientists on the streets of Tehran many times, and they've bombed many facilities. And just Israel is just a total gangster, and the U.S. uses it when it needs muscle.
Mm-hmm. And so this looks like kind of a global conflict now. Like we're in like a soft, cold World War III thing happening where Israel attacks Iran on behalf of the United States because of the conflict in Ukraine.
Right. I mean, it's been a world war since the beginning. Mm-hmm. But if the justification for bombing Iran is that they were aiding a belligerent in the war, they were aiding Russia in the war, then what about us? We're sending tanks to Ukraine now. I mean, that means to me that Russia would be justified in bombing the United States, right? I mean, and UK and France have been sending weapons directly to Ukraine. Well, Russia then, therefore, by this logic, would be justified in bombing all those countries. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the argument that's being made, is that it was just the justification that the bombing of Iran was justified because they were participating, giving material aid to one of the belligerents in this war. So if you extend that logic at all, next thing you know, you got Russia bombing half the planet.
All right, you're you're treating this as though there's something like international law and some standard of fairness. It's not because they aided a belligerent. It's because they aided the bad guys.
No, of course.
Yeah, I mean,
But I'm just saying that's the logic that they're using to justify it. Yeah, which is really it's also really dangerous.
Yeah,
that logic, because again, that means that everybody is subject to bombing. Everybody who's participated in this war in any way is subject to bombing.
Yeah, and with the AOC clip we played earlier, like nobody's talking about Ilhan Omar being stripped of her position because of her position on Israel. It's not because of the color of her skin or the fact she's a woman. It's her position on Israel. Israel's a third rail, and Israel gets to do whatever they want to do by approval of American Congress.
There have been many black women who have been super pro-Israel, and everybody loves them. Of course, it had nothing to do with women of color, please.
Did you catch Putin's speech on the anniversary of the Battle of Stalingrad?
Some of it, yeah, and and I've heard recounts of it. Yeah, what do you think?
I think that's a good one for people to check out to understand how culturally invested Russians are in this conflict. That this is something that's been brewing for 50 years. It's not something that just happened overnight in February of last year.
I gotta tell you, I mean, I've been studying the Ukraine war every day for what is it now, like almost a year, and every day I am more and more firm in my belief that we have no interest in supporting Ukraine, and that the Russian invasion, I don't want to say all of it was justified, but I understand it. Russia's been getting fucked, and they've been getting framed, and Putin's been getting framed since the early 2000s. And not just that, I mean, they've been fomenting, the CIA has been fomenting these these color revolutions in all these countries surrounding Russia, with the express intent of destabilizing Russia and creating regime change in Russia. That's what the color revolutions were explicitly designed for, with tremendous aid and assistance by the CIA. And that's just a part of it. I mean, the story is just, it's,
well, also just, it's good for people to hear how much Putin and the Russian people hate Nazis, and how much they hate the Banderites for continuing their legacy. Like, I think that's an emotional plea that needs to be heard by the West to be understood how much they have invested in this.
Right. And why German tanks.
German tanks at the Russian border is not a good look.
Not a good look. We've seen that before. And it was the worst loss of life in human history. Operation Barbarossa, 1941. Yeah, and the whole war between Russia and Germany, between the Soviets and Germany, from 41 to 44, it's the worst thing that's ever happened in human history. So yeah, I can understand why that doesn't sit well with a lot of Russians.
Totally, yeah.
But NATO's a defensive force, Michael.
It's a defensive force, yeah.
I mean, they actually say this as if like these F-16s and these tanks couldn't be used for offensive purposes. No, it's just defensive. It's a defensive force. So don't worry about it.
Yeah. You see all those Belarusian tennis athletes, they in Australia, they can't show they're being grilled and like forced to comment on the conflict in Ukraine and Russia by the media, but also the Australians aren't allowing their flag to be shown, the Belarusian or the Russian flag, so that you just see a white flag next to their name on TV.
It's the white flag of surrender.
Yeah.
They're forcing them to surrender, which is true. It's a global empire. This neoliberalism thing, it's a global empire. They don't play around. There's no place to hide. You'll be forced to declare a position, which side you're on, and you'll be punished if you choose the wrong side.
Yeah.
I mean, it is that simple. That's exactly what's been going on.
There should be a study about places that had intense COVID lockdowns and the correlation to their intensity of rhetoric on the Ukraine conflict.
Oh, yeah.
I'm certain that Ottawa and Australia and New Zealand certainly have some sort of correlation there.
Well, also, I want to see like correlation between the number of trans children in a population and the severity of rhetoric on Ukraine.
Yeah, number of Ukrainian flags in a neighborhood.
Yeah, that's
like
it.
That. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's a trans person in this country who doesn't have a Ukraine flag
Mhm.
on them right now. Yeah, it is amazing how well disciplined their troops are. You know,
Yeah.
the neoliberal empire, they've really trained their people well.
That's why I'm a little optimistic about the university narratives crumbling. Is like
Mm.
you talk about the incoherent ideology that they have, but for me, COVID pushed it to the point of absurdity, and it just seems so fickle, like in the wind. Like I think when I see professors, they're almost exhausted trying to keep up with what they're supposed to believe that day.
Oh yeah.
And they all are real human beings who have their own lives and their own actual opinions, but
Mhm.
it really is exhausting to keep up with what is the thing I'm supposed to be outraged about? How is this tied to climate change and white supremacy? And why is it Putin's fault?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It is. We really need to have a list of all of the things that were promised or guaranteed, over the last 10 years. If you start like in 2012, I mean, it's like just to see all the things that liberals absolutely knew was a fact, like 2012, 2013, it was women in college campuses are getting raped all the time. Then a year after that, it was the black students in colleges are suffering from violent white supremacy on college campuses, which, by the way, no one talks about anymore. I guess that all got fixed. I guess there's no more rape or white supremacy in colleges. And then Russiagate, just one lie after another for 3 years. But they totally knew it was true, and they knew that Putin was controlling the country, and and then all the COVID stuff. I mean, it's amazing. Like the lies of the left. It is quite a litany over the last decade. And someone needs to catalog all this, put it in one place, and so we can see it, and then put it out in public. Like, look at all these major claims that have been made, and then climate change. I mean, there was a debate in the Nation magazine, big democratic socialist magazine, very august journal, about whether we should preemptively evacuate Miami. Yeah, there are people on the left who are calling for evacuating Miami now, even though not a single thing is underwater in Miami. No one has died from this at all.
Try convincing the people of Miami to do that. Like,
can you imagine? Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so this is how like cut off the left is from like real people's lives. Like, no one wants that. Can you imagine? Like, it has zero chance. But this is what they talk about. They talk about stuff like this. They're so totalitarian. It's amazing. They're just social engineers. That's what they love to do. They love to move populations on a chessboard. Just move people around, manipulate people. Oof. Goodness. It's just a disgusting cult.
Yeah. Well, I think we're good to wrap this one up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So after every Unreported, we go hang out at Unregistered Live, which is a Zoom meeting with all of our patrons. If you want to join us, go to patreon.com/unregistered, and the URL will be right there, and we'll see you in the room.
Peace. Yeah. Sweet.
Michael, thank you for doing this makeup show. I will not have COVID again, I promise.
Yeah.
And we will see everyone in our regular time on Thursday.
Thanks. Yeah. See ya.
Thank you, man.
Peace.
Peace. See you on the other side.